Welcome to the Professional Development Webinar Series for Globe teachers. This is in support of the Regional Science Fairs and also the International Virtual Science Fair. This is our very last webinar that we're going to have in this series, and it's putting it together, communication, and Liz is going to talk about the poster. And we're still looking for people to write blog posts about what they're doing with their students. Again, it's in support of these regional science fairs, which were funded by a grant from the National Science Foundation. These are listed here and the locations of those. And I'm skipping through these slides, and I'm going to ask everybody to move very quickly on our polls today, and because again we're starting late. So what is your role in Globe? If everyone could indicate that, Liz will at least know, our presenter will know what you do. And we have a couple educators. GISN scientist, a Globe International Science Network scientist.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, and our next question is, what grade band do you teach? And you can definitely indicate more than one. And everyone's sort of indicating more than one.
Everyone does everything.
And are you currently using Globe in your classroom or in what you're doing? So we have a number of yeses.
Excellent.
And then what investigation areas do you do? I'm pretty high on the atmosphere and hydrosphere.
Great.
And Liz is an atmospheric scientist and also snow, so that would be hydrosphere. So
indeed.
She's in good company here. And then just to remind you of where we've been, we looked at field investigations in general and talked about the types of questions that you could have. And Kevin, who's on the line now, talked about developing a doable question. And then we had a session on, this one was on what graph do you use when looking at your data. And then the last one that we had was on writing conclusions using the claims evidence research framework. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Liz. And I'm really thrilled to have Liz here. She graduated from the University of New Hampshire in the PhD program here, and that's where I first met her. And she is actually out at UCAR, which is where the Globe Implementation Office is housed as well. And so it's really neat to bring those two places closely together through both Liz and myself and Globe. And she is absolutely wonderful, and she's an award-winning poster presenter, and that is why I asked her to do this for us. So thank you, Liz.
Well, thank you, Jen. And with that, I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see what I'm working with here. I'll be doing some stuff in Safari, Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. So you'll be, actually I don't think I'll be doing Word, but you'll be able to see what I'm doing on my screen. So everyone just let me know that you can see my screen. There should be a PowerPoint opened up there. It says putting it all together. Let me make sure everyone can see that. I guess I need to go back just to make sure everyone could. Jen, you could, right?
See what you're doing? Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll just assume that they can as well then. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start off actually with my very, very first poster. So this is from 2007. It was part of my master's research, so this will be a bit of a higher level sort of project compared to what your students will be doing. But it was my first poster presentation, and it's almost 9 years old. So why don't we just take a quick look, and I'm going to point out some things here. For one of the best things about PowerPoint is when you go into full screen mode with a poster, it's a pretty good gauge of how small your font is and how readable it is. So from 5 to 7 feet away, this type of poster, my very first draft, is probably not very readable. I have to squint my eyes quite a bit to see everything, and ultimately there ended up being 1,300 words on this poster. And so what I'm going to show you how to do is how to take a poster like this, and some students have a tendency to be very wordy, and turn it into something a little bit more like this. So believe it or not, there are only 600 words on this poster. So I took a 1,300 word poster and reduced all the text by half. And I've also set apart my graphs using some boxes. I've added a lot more space between the text. I've implemented some bullet points to set apart my points and conclusions. I'm using color to set apart tables. So these are the types of tips that I'll be going over with you guys today. So now that we've seen those posters, let's go back to the presentation. And we'll start with the components of a science poster. And then I'll talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is fonts. I'll go into colors, graphics, the actual presentation of the poster itself, and then some PowerPoint basics. And then if you guys want any tips or tricks, that'll be the time for you guys to ask me some questions about how do I do this in PowerPoint, or how do I do that? So we'll start with the anatomy of a poster. Generally speaking, your title is going to be going right up at the top. You need your authors, affiliations. In this case, it would be just your student's school, and then also probably the GLOBE program would be in there. Your abstract is typically in the upper left there. Introduction, hypotheses, methods, some tables or figures, results, and these can all, the table and the figures can be melded together with the results there. Conclusions and discussions, your acknowledgments, and of course some references. So there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of the placement of these, but in general you're reading from top to bottom and from left to right. So what components are going in here? Well, let's talk first about the title. I think this one can be one of the most important. And specifically because it needs to be catchy. This is a bad example of a title. So this was my original title. I actually found an earlier draft of that first poster. It was Trends in Variability in Wintertime Snowfall, Snow Cover, Minimum, Maximum, and Mean Temperature in the Northeastern U.S., 1965 to 2005, Implications for Future Climate Change. So that is a mouthful. It's 24 words. It takes a long time to read. I probably lost people by the time I started listing all those commas there, and it's really just not that interesting. A good title will typically have less than 15 words. It's catchy, not jargony. Words like variability do not need to be in there. And the way I like to think about this, especially for students, is what's your headline? If the New York Times called you tomorrow and said, ooh, what was this awesome science project all about that you did? You want to think what the title of a headline would be for a news story. And it captures your main finding. You can give them the punchline right off the bat. So a better example of that previous title is that winters are warmer and less snowy in the Northeastern United States, 1965 to 2005. So you can see that's much more catchy. That'll definitely get someone a lot more interested than talking about trends and variability. So for the next part, in the abstract, you want it to be less than 200 words, and ideally on a poster, I would say even less than 150 words. It takes about probably a minute and a half to read 200 words, so you don't want someone sitting around awkwardly reading your abstract for a whole minute before you actually engage them in your poster. So short and sweet is the way to go. It's going to describe your problem that you're addressing. It's going to describe the questions that you asked, so your research questions, and these could be very abbreviated versions of your research questions. Talk about your objectives of the project, what conclusions you reached, so this will be like the highlights of your results, and any recommendations or future work that you recommend based on your findings. So we'll do a little anatomy of the abstract. So describing the problem, in the northeastern U.S., climate change threatens our maple syrup industry, hydrology, travel safety, and the multi-billion-dollar winter tourism and recreation industry. So this is 24 words, one sentence description of the problem. Doesn't need to be a whole paragraph summarizing all of the literature on your problem. One sentence usually suffices. The questions we asked, in this case I've just abbreviated it to one simple question: how has winter climate changed in the past 40 years? And then my objectives for the study, where in this study, winter, December through March trends in snowfall, snow-covered days, and temperature were investigated using high-quality controlled USHCN and cooperative network data over the period 1965. So this is what I'm going to do. This is my objective and how I'm going to research it. In my conclusions, I simply bulleted out my results, so it's not in a paragraph form. It's bulleted out, and that way people can read it pretty easily and know that winter maximum temperatures warmed faster than minimum temperatures. Snowfall decreased, and the greatest decreases were in December, and then a reduction in snow-covered days was likely tied to that increase in winter maximum temperature. In recommendations, this one I kind of abbreviated. I actually have some longer ones, but this one I abbreviated just that we act on climate change now to prevent additional warming of 2 to 6 degrees by 2100. So nice and short. Ultimately, that entire abstract that I just read to you was 146 words, I believe. So nice and short, easy to get through. So the next component of your poster will be your research questions. It typically gives the background of the problem, how is it relevant to Earth's environment, is it of scientific interest, is it original, and for the GLOBE purposes, it also must be answerable. So for the research questions that I did on that poster, at least tailoring them to the GLOBE sort of protocols, is can we apply some quality assurance and quality control measures to improve trend analysis of long-term climate variables in the Northeast U.S., and then using the high-quality data, how have changes in snowfall, snow cover, and temperature, how have they changed over the past 40 years? So keep those nice and short. You always want to list those questions as numbers as well, so that way you have a list of questions instead of just a paragraph of questions. For the hypothesis, it was interesting when I was looking through the GLOBE protocols, because it's a little more unusual today to see hypotheses on research posters, at least at AGU or something. You still do see it, but not quite as frequently. But for the GLOBE program, it must be testable, measurable, and proposes a possible explanation. So I've just done a quick one here. I didn't actually have a hypothesis for mine, except that I expected that my high-quality climate records will demonstrate a consistent warming trend in the Northeast U.S. I didn't exactly go into a possible explanation because that really wasn't the point of the research. But clearly, if I were to go out on a limb there, I'd say it was probably the increase in fossil fuel emissions. So the next part would be our data and methods. This is where you want to list all of your data sources, in particular a website. If you're listing one of those, you need to say what dates you collected the data from the website, and also if you're collecting your own data, what was your period of analysis, what variables are you collecting. So you don't just want to say GLOBE data, you want to say specifically GLOBE minimum, maximum temperature data, or snowfall data. You want to describe what GLOBE protocols you used and the steps you took to complete the project in sequence. And then if there was any collaboration, where did that fit in with your protocols? So my next part is the results. This is one of my favorites. I like to obsess over graphics. So specifically, you want your graphs to guide the audience to the two conclusions. You don't want them to just say, hey, here's a graph. You actually want it to tell the story that you're trying to have them understand based on your results. You need to have very clear axis labels. These need to be easy to interpret, so complicated graphs, probably not a good idea. I was actually really thrilled to see the which graph do I choose poster that Jen put up there. And then also be careful with tables. Tables can be a little frustrating to read, especially when a plot might be better. So here's a bad example of a plot. This is the default, so you can see there's no axis labels. I don't know what Y is. I don't know what X is. X is actually buried underneath the data. It's unreadable. There's no legend labels. It just says 1, 2, and 3. There's a very small font. It's pretty tiny. I think that's size 10. And there's no figure caption. So this was GLOBE data that I downloaded. So we'll go to that data right here. So that's what the plot is. And essentially all I've done is the bare minimum. I select the data, I say charts, and I said line chart. And as you can see, that's what pops up. So this is identical to the one that I was showing here. So to make this into a better graph, what you would want to do is to add your axis labels. So now we know that this is temperature on the y-axis. We have the date on the x-axis. We now know what each of those colored lines mean, right? We have our maximum, minimum, and solar noon temperatures. And we have some evenly spaced numbers, especially on a temperature graph. It's usually ideal to put a 0 line, so where is the freezing point? That's always a good tip to have there. And then also where I got my data from. Then lastly, you need to have a figure caption. So just plotting the data out and assuming that someone knows what it is isn't enough. I need to say that these are temperature measurements from Littleton, Mass. In the United States from January 10th to February 9th. So I can show you a couple ways of doing that in Excel. So for example, if you want the font to be bigger, instead of using size 10, you can go up there and I usually start with 24. The font that I like to use. And then I would want to move the legend onto the graph. That gives you a lot more space to work with. And then you can move the plot area, make that quite a bit larger. And then to move the x-axis, you would want to right-click on the y-axis, which is a little counterintuitive. Say Format Axis, and then when you see horizontal axis crosses at, instead of having it cross at 0, which is where it crosses now, we want it to cross at -15. So just say that. Now it's moved down there. I can't really read the numbers though, so I'm going to actually move this up, like so. And right now it doesn't say exactly what it is, so if we right-click on that and say Select Data, we can now add our category x-axis labels. So if we click here, we can now put the dates in there. Like that. Now we have the dates. We also want to name those series. We have Series 1, Series 2, and Series 3. Well, Series 1 is the solar noon temperature. Series 2 is our minimum temperature. And then Series 3 is our maximum temperature. So you can see how this is already coming along quite nicely and resembling the graph that I was showing you. To add some axis labels, you go to Chart Layout, Horizontal Axis, you'd want the date. Up there. I love Excel. Oh, well, you can fiddle with that later. And then a rotated title for temperature. And always put your units on the graph as well. So you can see this is starting to resemble a much better graph that students would want to have on their posters instead of one that's just the default from Excel. For tables, I have similar tips. So in this example, this is a pretty bad example of a table. Everything's this has no units. We don't know what the units are for rain, snow, or temperature. Again, the font is pretty small. I don't know what the first column is listing. I don't know what the values are for why they aren't using the same significant digits. And where is the table caption? So again, to improve this, we make the font a lot bigger. We add a table caption. This is the total rain, snow, and average daily temperature in January 2016. This is actually fabricated data. I made this data up, so it's not real data. And these are the classrooms from which we pulled it. Now we have units on there, and everything has the same number of digits in there as well. So this format here of having no vertical lines in a table and only the horizontal line that delineates the bottom, top, and the header rows is pretty common in the scientific literature. It's a very clean way of looking at data. So those can improve it a lot. Those are results. There's definitely some more you could do with results and making sure that you have some good text to accompany your figures. And then for the conclusions and future work, you want something that's supported by the data. So for example, in my poster with the warming winters and less snow, I can't really say that it's caused by climate change. That wasn't the point of the research, and it's not supported by the data. What is supported by the data is that we do have evidence of trends that show warmer winter temperatures and less snow. We also want a thorough explanation of how that conclusion was reached, and then describing the next steps of your research. Last but not least, you also want a bibliography and any sources. So you want to list all of the sources that were used in your research. So if the students are using a diagram from a website that illustrates the carbon cycle, you need to say where that came from. I usually like to just put whatever the website is, .com. Listing out the entire link is usually unnecessary, and they also tend to change over time. So as long as you say what website you got it from, that's usually sufficient. All right, so we've gone over the components. We now know how they're set up on the poster. Now let's go into some font details. And some people can be really picky about this, other people not so picky. I tend to be a picky person. In general, the guideline is to use sans-serif fonts. So if you ever look at fonts in close detail, you can see these little doodads that are on the coming off of the letters. Those are known as serifs. And if you have sans-serif, that means that those are missing from your font, and it just makes it easier to read. They also tend to have even line thickness, so instead of being thin at one part and thicker at the other, they tend to be evenly have even thickness. And this just makes it easier to read. There's actually people who study this, and they've done studies that demonstrate that sans-serif fonts are easier to read. So here are some of my favorite sans-serif fonts. These are all from a Mac, so some of these might not be available on a PC. Arial and Helvetica, definitely. Franklin Gothic, I believe, as well. And I think this one, Gill Sans and Avenir, tend to be more Mac specific. But they're just visually appealing and very easy to read when you put them on a poster. The size of the font, very important. So titles tend to be in size font 80 or larger. If you're finding that you're writing your title in 80 or larger and it's taking up more than 2 lines, your title is too long. Make it shorter. Avoid the use of semicolons unless absolutely necessary, and just try to keep them short and sweet. Remember, we want something that's a headline, something that's going to be really catchy and attract an audience. Your headings, so this would be the components, so abstract, methods, results, typically in size 40 to 60 font or larger. And then body text, a minimum of 36. That first poster I showed you guys at the beginning was size 30 font, and that's why it was so hard to read. If you increase it to at least 36, it's going to be a lot easier to read. And this also helps limit the amount of text that's on your poster. If you're limited to size 36, that means that you only have so much space to put words on there, and it can help reduce that. If you increase to a minimum of 40 or larger, then that's even better. You want to avoid using stuff like drop shadow. Maybe for the title you can get away with that. Outline tends to be really hard to read. Anything with a reflection or a glow. It can be very tempting for students to play around with these sorts of features on their fonts, but ultimately they just don't look as great in print, and it makes it much more difficult to get the message out of the poster if you're distracted by these sorts of effects. So that's my spiel on fonts. At this point, I'm actually going to go back to here and just make sure that I have some questions. Oh, I do have a question. Great. There's a poster template that titles are a little different. That does not matter. So I think if you're going to follow the titles that are on the template, I would go with those. This is more of a general, I guess I'm giving a general science poster. So if the template has specific titles, I would try to stick to those. And maybe Jen could comment more on that.
The only thing I would add is that it really depends on the teacher at this point and what they're going over. The templates are, and I think, Liz, you're also going to show them some other templates too.
Yes.
The templates and the titles, it really depends on what your research looks like. And they're just places to start if you don't have anywhere to start.
Great. Excellent question. All right, so now let's go into my next favorite, colors. So I found that students can be very experimental with colors. They're like, oh, bright red's my favorite color, and oh, bright blue is my second favorite color, and I really want to put it on my poster, and then they print it out, and I don't know about you guys, but looking at this right now, it really does hurt my eyes. I kind of have to cover it up with my hand because it's just so jarring. Other times they choose colors that are very not easy to read. It actually says so hard to read right here. And it's because,
Liz?
Yeah.
We can't see your...
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to share screen. I will do that. Thank you, Jen. Share. There we go. Okay. I'll try that again. There we go. Okay. Now can you see?
Yes, we can.
All right. So the colors, this is what I was talking about. They have a tendency to try and use really bright colors and it can be very tempting to try and do something that might look good on a screen, might not even look good on the screen, and then when you print it out, it looks terrible. So for example, if you were to print out this bottom part where it's the dark blue and the black, it's very difficult to read, especially when you have low light, and conference halls can sometimes have low light. Better options, I find, are to use a lighter background with darker font, avoid really bright bold colors, and stick to more muted colors. I have a tendency to not print posters with dark backgrounds just because it's a lot of ink. That's my personal preference. It's up to you guys if you want to use that much ink. But ultimately, I find that the ones that use a lighter background with darker font tend to be much easier to read. If you're having a hard time picking colors, it can be very challenging to see if something looks good. Go to the experts. Usually I use the themes in PowerPoint. They have lots of color themes, so I'll show you an example of that right now. If I go into PowerPoint, and I say themes up at the top, it'll depend on what version of PowerPoint you're using, but if you go to themes and then colors, there are all sorts of color themes that you can use, and this makes it a lot easier to try and pick something that's going to be visually appealing and easy to read, because they've already done all the hard work for you. Another option, if you want to get a little fancier, is to use this website. It's called peloton.com. And you can play around with a color wheel and use, say, like a triage of colors. You can move them around, and it'll show you over here what they look like. And you can move it around, make a lighter palette over there. You can choose just to move around a few things. And what's really neat about this is that you can go to a vision simulation over here. So a lot of people, not a lot, but 1% of men are colorblind, and including one of my advising committee members, he was colorblind. And I had done a graph that had red and green in it, and he was like, I can't tell the difference between these, Liz. You need to choose a different color scheme. So if you're not sure, you can always go like that. And then you can see what the color scheme does for different sorts of color blindness. And you can see when colors don't look alike. All right? To export those or to choose those colors, usually what I end up doing is just putting the palette off to the side. And then when I go here and say I want to change the color of that box, I would go to Format, Fill, More Colors, and then you have your little color picker that you can simply move over to the color that you want to change it to. If I wanted to change it to yellow, that would do it. So pretty easy to use, but can get a little overwhelming. All right, so those are colors. Next with graphics, I like high quality. These are actually two globe logos that I downloaded from Google. You can see the first one is pretty poor resolution. It might have looked good when it was very small, but when it gets blown up and printed out on a poster that's, say, like 2 feet by 3 feet, it's going to look very blurry and just generally not high quality. The same can go for your graphs and for any other figures that you download from the internet. So the best way to get around that, I find, is if you are looking for images, so say I'm looking for a globe logo. I type globe.gov logo into Google. I go to images, and then I can see there's a whole bunch of them, and these all look pretty good. They'll give you the size right at the bottom. So this one's 175 by 69. That's pretty tiny. This one is 2000 by 1793, much higher resolution. And to narrow it down, you can go to search tools at the top there, size, and only large ones. So then you can download that specific one. You usually go to view image, and then right click on it to save image as, and that'll save it to wherever you want. I could save it to the desktop is usually the easiest place for me to find it. And I'll just say globe logo large. And then when I insert it into my PowerPoint, insert photo, picture from file. I know I just downloaded it to my desktop, so I'll just click on it there. And there it is. I can resize it, make it a little bit smaller. And then the best thing to do is to compress them. So you can see I wrote compress there. To do that, select the image, hit compress, So this is usually under Format Picture, Compress. And you'd want, if you're printing your poster, best for printing. If you're doing an electronic poster session, you would say best for viewing on screen, and that'll reduce it to 150 pixels per inch. So if you hit OK, now this has been compressed. And it looks the same, which is great. All right. So those are my graphics. And then for the presentation itself, and this is more, I don't really have too many slides on this. There's basically your face-to-face versus a virtual poster session. I've never actually done a virtual poster session, but I've done plenty of face-to-face ones, and one of the ones where I got an award for my poster was indeed a face-to-face. And I think it's important for students to realize that their poster is not the only thing judges are judging them on. They need to understand that they're also judging on how well they can explain the poster and engage the audience in their poster. So making sure you're talking in a way that is not mumbling, making sure you're not talking in a way that is, I tend to trail off at the end of my sentences, so I try not to do that as well. And there's a certain art to guiding someone through the poster. So let's go to this one here. This is my final revised draft of my poster. I would start roping them in with saying, hey, did you know that winters are warmer and less snowy in the Northeastern United States since 1965? This is pretty important because I like maple syrup. I like not having any flood events, and I also like skiing a lot. So this is a way to really get someone roped in. And then you would guide them through your research questions, your data set, your methods tend to be a little bit more abbreviated, and I focus mostly on the results part of my research and what I would do for future work. So there's definitely a certain knack to that. And it gets better over time. It would be beneficial for students to have a mock poster session prior to the real deal. I find that whenever I give a practice round of my presentation, either to myself or to, say, my husband or even my 15-month-old son, it usually has better results than if I just go in there having not practiced at all. With that, I'll go back to the controls. Let me just have the microphone is low quality. Okay, great. We'll go back to sharing. Okay. Going back. For the virtual poster session, maybe Jen can talk more about what to expect for that. Will the students have access to the audience online? Is there a chat module? Is it?
No, that's just going to be uploading their posters.
Okay.
Their research.
And so in that sense, I guess it would make sense to tailor their poster to be a bit more detailed in terms of, not leaving open-ended bits that otherwise would have be explained in a face-to-face. So it might be good to be a little bit more thorough.
Tracy, did you have anything you wanted to add about that?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay. Great.
I think all the points that Liz is bringing out are perfect.
Okay. Well, maybe one day I'll do a virtual poster session and I'll be able to have some more tips on that one. So I'm excited to see the globe one. That'll be neat. Okay, so now some PowerPoint basics. Raise of hands. That would have been a good poll question, Jen. How familiar do you guys feel like you are with PowerPoint? Experts, not very, just starting. Oh my God, PowerPoint is so scary. I hate using it. You could use the chat to answer that if you wanted. Pretty good. Okay. Use it a lot. Yay, Jen. Anyone else? Use it frequently? Okay. Pretty good. Excellent. And for your students, do you feel like your students use it pretty frequently, or are they relatively new to it? Oh, good. Excellent. Oh, that's so good to hear.
I think that's a great idea.
Excellent. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, good to see that lots of students use it often. I have been in some high school classrooms in the last 5 years where some of them didn't use it. Okay, and then middle schoolers tend to be new to it. Okay. Okay, good to know. So when I usually make a do a PowerPoint poster, I typically start with a template. It's usually one of Prezi. I've never done a Prezi poster. I've done Prezi presentations, and I think they're so much fun. So I usually start with a template. I tend not to start with a new file just because it's a little easier to fill in the boxes if you already have them. I always adjust the page size first. This is probably, if you guys are familiar with PowerPoint, this is probably all basic stuff. But I usually just adjust the page size first to make sure that I'm working with the right sizes. And then I create my boxes. I won't do that since you guys are pretty used to that. One thing I really appreciate...
Liz, we can't see your screen again.
Oh, son of a gun. Okay. One sec. I wasn't actually showing anything. I was just going through the list on there. Okay, there we go. But one thing I liked, since you guys tend to be sound pretty familiar with it, is making sure you're using your align and grouping tools to create things that are visually appealing and making sure they're organized, and also creating space between the text. I find it pretty helpful to make sure that things are not crowded like they were in my first poster. So in this one, not really using good spacing between the text. It's pretty crowded in there. But in my second one that I was showing here, I'm doing a lot more to create space. So I tend to do that quite a bit more in there as well. So just to show you guys some templates, you guys sounds like you're familiar with the globe poster template. I also found some nice ones on makesigns.com. If you go there, they had a number of free templates down there. So if students are having a hard time, say, with like colors and figuring out a layout, and they want to do something that's not the globe template, they could start here. And you can see there's some other alternative ways of setting things up and adding a half circle, or you can have it set up so it's a vertical poster. But I like that they also choose the colors for you because it can get a little overwhelming. You'll note that a lot of these do use the light background in them as well. There were some other ones in there. The posterpresentations.com also had some nice templates as well. And what's nice is that you can sort them by sizes. So then you can just download the free ones there as well. So that's pretty handy. And that. I was going to ask you guys if you had any other questions for tips and tricks on how to make good posters. So yeah, with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Yes, Todd, the slides will be posted to the Globe website, and you'll be able to click those links.
Thank you.
And Liz, you have your contact information in the presentation as well?
Yes, I do.
Great.
Yeah, I can actually, I can put it up right here. That's the last slide. So I have a website. I actually posted this on my website, and I'll post the slides there as well. I also tend to tweet a lot about science, snow, and climate. And if you ever want to email me, I'm happy to look over posters or provide any sort of answers to questions you guys have. So you can contact me at burakowski@ucar.edu.
And we are going to get Liz listed on our Globe International list of scientists. Right, Liz?
Sure. Sounds great.
It doesn't seem like there are any more questions, so we'll wrap it up today. And as I said, this is the last in the webinar series. Please share widely with your friends and spread the word about these, because I think it's been a great series, and we've definitely brought in some nice experts to talk about each of these topics. And Liz, thank you very much for showing the before and after poster. I think that was really neat.
Of course. No, it was actually a hoot for me to see my very first poster. I was surprised I still had the file. So.
Okay, everybody have a great afternoon and a good weekend, because it is soon going to be the weekend.
Yay. All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Bye.